Robert Gregory, ex-Deputy Director of Capital Investment for the NHS, joins us in this episode as we delve into the A to Z of business cases. We discuss the danger of subjectivity in measuring objective concepts and how you can mitigate this by creating a strong quantifiable baseline. For Robert, the biggest risk in business cases is insufficient investment in people early on. Robert thinks he has turned down as many business cases in his career as he has approved, which is a true measure of success, as the investment was wisely used. He is also a strong advocate of reviewing the business case, as changes in the environment will have a direct impact on its ongoing viability. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We are here to help you and your organisation understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Robert Gregory. Robert spent his professional career working in the UK National Health Service. He has a broad range of skills, knowledge and experience in healthcare, capital investment and business cases, and he provided subject matter expertise to support the delivery of significant and complex programs of investment in all NHS sectors. He's an accredited gateway reviewer and probably has more experience in relation to the public sector business case development, assurance and approval processes than anyone else. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, Richard. Lovely to be here. I don't know where I go with an introduction like that.
So I'm going to drop you in really at the deep end. When I think about business cases, I think about quantifiable measures. How does one measure potentially unquantifiable service improvements, which are important indicators of success, and capture those in a business case?
In the NHS, which is where I've come from, we're often being asked to invest capital in projects to deliver a step change in things that are hard to measure. So, we will improve patient experience. We will improve staff morale. We'll create better health in the local population. And these are all broad, non-specific, and yet really, really important reasons to invest money. But they are really hard to measure. And, we're told in the public sector that all of our objectives should be measurable. A lot of the time in health, we are looking at things that are very, very hard to measure. Now, I know you had Stacey Barr that you interviewed, and she has a view that to be measurable, an outcome needs to be observable. So if there's a way of detecting the existence of that outcome, it must potentially be measurable. And what's the point in investing money if you absolutely cannot measure in any way that good thing which has happened? And I think all the best practice authors and disciplines tell us that there are going to be tricky areas, but you need to try and measure them. So in health, when we're looking at things like patient experience and so on, we're looking at things like questionnaires, interviews, sort of non-financial scoring systems. And those are all really, really helpful. The only trouble is they can be immensely subjective. And I think any time that you try to measure benefit, risk, or any of these rather intangible things, there is a real risk of subjectivity. And I think the way that we need to approach it, and often it's not the thing that's done, is to baseline whatever measure you're going to use. So if you're going to use a fairly crude measure of happiness, how did you find your visit to the hospital, and so on. There's always a risk anyway that when you ask that question, the answer is going to be open to interpretation. So you need to look at the situation before the investment. You need to be going in months or years before the point at which you build something new to see what it was like beforehand. So you ask people, how do you feel about this facility? How do you feel about your experience today? And then 3 years later, when you've built the new one, you ask them the same question. Now, it might be that the measure you're using is potentially subjective, but if you've baselined it to the best of your ability, you can then start to look at how it differs once you've invested. It is a really, really difficult thing to do. I know that in the public sector, the Treasury really get it. They do. And in our business case methodology that we've used, and which all the government organisations use, it absolutely is. It's well acknowledged that you can't quantify things always financially or with a really precise numerical scoring system. But we just need to explain what is the quasi measure that we're going to use and how are we going to make it as objective as possible. And I can't say better than that.
Robert, that's fascinating. But surely in every business case, there has to be some financial measure. There has to be some financial quantifiable measure that the bean counters, the money people can actually look at and say, okay, we can sign that off, alongside those unmeasurable good things that have to be done. If you put that together, what's the most challenging aspect of getting a high quality business case written? Is it the method? Is it the content? Or is it the people involved?
Okay, I'll answer this in two ways. The first thing I will say is, here's a good example of an investment that's going to cost a lot of money, which requires a high quality business case, but people might struggle with. You've got a building which is old, run down, and really doesn't deliver the goods. And you need to build a new one. Now, however good the new building will be at housing the service you're going to provide, it's probably going to cost more than what you were spending before, because the old building was fully depreciated. It probably wasn't being routinely maintained as well as it might, because actually that was proving very difficult. So a lot of people have said to me over the years, well, this new thing we're doing is going to cost us more. We can't show any benefit in terms of financial gain. And I'm telling you that now because I would challenge that. And I would say, if you go back to this whole thing of baselining and looking at the situation before you started, if you were to carry on in that old building for another 20 years, how much money might you spend keeping it safe, stopping it from flooding, heating it, even though it's not insulated properly and all the heat's going out through the roof? There are always ways of proving that something which costs more to run later on but is actually more efficiently configured is delivering something better than it was before, but only if you measure the things that were happening before. So having said that, I'll move on to your question about, what is the most challenging aspect? Is it the method? Is it the content? Is it the people? The method is very tangible. And in the UK public sector and across much of the world, we're now using the Better Business Cases methodology, or the 5-case model, which some people might refer to it as. Now, that's a tangible method. It can be taught and it can be embedded in processes, and people can preach evangelically about it. And sometimes there's problems with that method because a lot of organizations just want to get early quick wins out the way, and they don't want to get caught up in what they regard as needless bureaucracy. So yeah, there are potential challenges with the method, but if you've got a good organization with a good program or project management approach, generally the method can be embedded and used. So what about the content that flows from the method? The content, if you're using the method properly, the content will flow. It'll come out through this process of information gathering that goes on when you write a business case. Problem for the content is, as with the method, people often want to cut corners early on. Often people want to get sign up in principle to the funding, and they want to do that by writing a quick and dirty business case in order to trigger the bean counters to release the cash. So sometimes you'll have a challenge with the content, but I would say that the biggest challenge is the people, and I'll tell you why. In my experience, and I don't think there are many people who would disagree, all over the place what we see is insufficient investment in human resources at the very early stages of a business case. So you're doing strategic scoping, you're constructing an outline of what it is you want to do, but you're nowhere near your funder giving you the green light to spend. And in my experience, a lot of organizations don't like to spend any more than they need to on these early stages because they're actually doing it at financial risk. So to start with, an insufficient investment in people early on is a really risk, because if you think about building a house, if you don't get the foundations right, it might look lovely, but it could come tumbling down 10 years later. The second thing is, from a people perspective, is some very well-meaning people develop business cases, but if they haven't been developed themselves, if they haven't had training in how to write a business case, most people will only write a business case once or twice in their lives for a substantial investment. And I come across people all the time who have just been told, oh, yeah, you're the project manager for this, you write the business case. They need investing in. They need to be prepared to do it properly. And again, you often find that boards don't want to invest early on because they don't know whether they're going to get the money to see it through to the later stages. Now, what they sometimes do, and this is a bit perversely, what some organizations will do is to bring in a consultant to write a business case because it's easier than actually having to bankroll a new substantive member of staff. And I'm a management consultant, and I would say, and I'm very happy to say that I think that's a very sensible thing to do on occasion. But you need to be an informed client, and management consultants need to be used where they deliver best value. And the best management consultant in the world will not deliver you the product that you want if you're not giving them the right information within a project and program framework that is being driven by the client. So in summary, it's the whole people thing. It's about organizations investing in people early on in a process to get the business case right. And all the good methods in the world won't stack up to much if you're not putting the right people power behind making them happen.
That's fascinating. And I think this investment in people is actually the key, I think, about productivity, the whole approach UK business has, I think, to the way we work, that we always assume that people can pick up something and run with it. But do you think every project needs a business case, or are there some so obvious that they're just projects that you just look at and think, we should just do this? Or do you think even those obvious projects sort of benefit from the discipline of thinking about and arguing about the right solution?
I would say that anything that you're going to do needs some sort of business justification. Does it need a business case per se? I think if you look at business justification at one end of a spectrum and an all singing, all dancing business case at the other, somewhere on that spectrum you're going to justify what you do. But it's just how you do it and the form that it takes that might vary. So if something unexpected happens and the roof blows off, or there's a flood, or the boiler packs up, and you're running a business or a hospital or a theatre or any sort of facility, you're not going to spend long debating whether or not to shore up the roof. You're probably going to spend a few tens or hundreds of thousands making sure that the building is watertight, warm, and can be heated. So to that extent, you might sit down with the chief executive and your director of finance the morning of the incident and say, right, well, we've got money in the bank, we're going to spend it now. But what you probably don't want to do is to say, we'll go out and buy a brand new roof, or we'll go out and buy a brand new boiler, because you might want to take the opportunity to ask yourself the question, if we're going to do this, do we want to replace like for like? Is it an opportunity to do something else? Can we be more efficient? So you might make an immediate decision without much of a formal case. But what comes next, you'd probably want to wrap some thinking around. There's other examples. If you were going to buy computers from a pre-competed contract framework where you knew the price, you knew the quality, you knew the contract terms, and you had some money in the bank, it probably wouldn't take the organization more than a day or so to decide, is it sensible to do this? Now, when I worked in the NHS, we had business case frameworks that ranged from the very, very complex to the very, very simple. And a business justification case that we used to use was, well, it was the one recommended by the Treasury, actually, which actually a good project manager can articulate within a few hours. So I think the answer to your question is, there aren't many projects where you would just do it without some quality of thought and decision making, but that will range in what it is. I'd just say one thing, which is just do it becomes a really, really risky venture if you're in often a small organization or a business unit where the person saying just do it is very close to the person who's saying, okay, here's the money. And sometimes they might even be the same person. So, that sort of small businesses can sometimes make difficult decisions or the wrong decisions, because the person who holds the purse strings is also the one deciding what to do with it. So I just think I would, yeah, of course there are no-brainers and just do it's, but just spend a few minutes thinking about, is it right to go out without wrapping some quality of thought around it?
Thanks very much, Robert. In all your career, have you ended up recommending not to proceed on many occasions because the business case just doesn't stack up, despite all the people that thought it was the best thing since sliced bread?
Yes, quite often. I had a discussion with somebody during the latter months of my career in the NHS because I retired last summer. And I asked myself the question, what does it say about me that I've probably turned down as many business cases as I've recommended for approval? Is that a successful history? Well, I think it is. I think every one of those decisions was a success, because investment appraisal is about asking yourself the question, is this the right thing to do? And to decide not to invest is just as important as deciding to invest. It's the organization's safeguard against making a wrong decision. So yes is the answer. And I think that is not a bad thing at all.
No, I think you're right. I think, what's the comment? We would be able to deliver much better projects if we stopped delivering the projects that we don't need to deliver.
Yeah,
and we focused on those that would make the real difference. But the business case is a live document, isn't it? You create it at the beginning of the project. You then should update it as you go through the life of the project to make sure it's always current and reflecting, what is the real value that the organization's going to get from the endeavor. Is it really updated, or is that a myth that, it's written and it's put in the drawer at the end of when the money's approved, and it never sees the light of day till the end of the project?
I haven't got any quantifiable data on this one, so I'll talk from the experience I've had. This is what we teach people. In all the best business case processes and project and program management practice, we tell them that it's a living document. When I run training in better business case methodology, I always describe the business case as a large, open, empty, loose leaf file sitting on the project manager's desk. And as you go through a business case process, you carry out various steps, various actions, various workshops. And as you complete each one of those, you build up a body of knowledge and you put it into your loose leaf folder. And at intervals, over time, you pick that folder up and you take it to somebody and you say, look, this is where we are at the moment. We'd like approval to go to the next step. And so to that extent, it's a living document. And even when you finish the approval decision making, you're going to go back and you're going to review it and evaluate it. And it continues to have a life. But it takes time and money to do that. And it takes organizational commitment. I think it would be safe to assume that they don't always get updated. Now, my experience was in the public sector, where we have quite a rigorous process of approval for large investments. So I think where one part of an organization or one part of the public sector has to submit a business case to another part in order to get a tick in the box and to have something approved, it's far more likely that it'll be kept up to date. I think there's a risk where organizations are far more autonomous. You've got this thing all the time about wanting to have more autonomy. And autonomy is a wonderful thing as long as you use it properly. Now, if there isn't somebody asking that question, this thing you're asking us to spend money on that you started planning 2 years ago, have you recently looked at your investment objectives and looked at the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve and asked yourself the question, is it still the right thing to do? There is a risk that something might get nodded through without that update. And I'll tell you something. I asked myself a question, and when the whole COVID impact was better understood, in the last year or so, so many parts of business and industry had moved on to online meetings and online ways of working. And I can only assume there must be a load of business cases that were in development prior to COVID that talked about building new buildings and creating more space. And I would ask anybody who was halfway through one of those business cases at the outset of the COVID incident, as you might want to call it, is this decision to build a big building and stack the desks in and so on and so forth still the right one? Have you configured it properly? The business case should be a living document. And in answer to your question is, I don't think it always is. I think that to mitigate against that, any board that is overseeing an organisation or any public body that is overseeing another needs to ask the question, are you using a proper project program management approach? And are people being pressed to do the right things when they're gathering information to help them make decisions? Because a business case will be out of date the minute you finish it.
Robert, you clearly have a sort of a pretty strong view of the value of that governance, that the separation between the person that's giving the money, the person that wants the money, and that assessment of whether it is value for money. But could you think of 3 other things that you know now that you would have liked to have known when you first started developing business cases? If you were presenting to some new graduates coming into the NHS who are going to be responsible for developing the business cases, what 3 pearls of wisdom would you like to pass on to them?
I think that firstly, nothing should be set in tablets of stone. So when I was setting out doing this sort of thing 35 years ago, I read the rules. I worked in the public sector. We're very good at writing rules. I read the rules and it told me that to write a business case, you do this, then that will happen, then that will happen. But actually nothing is set in tablets of stone. And I would say one of the things I learned was if you're developing a business case, liaise really closely with those who are going to approve it from day one, because then anything is possible. And if, as we said earlier, there is a business decision that really is very, very straightforward, there aren't many options, talk to whoever's going to be looking at your business case and say to them, would you be happy if I presented it in this way rather than that way? Because, it'll save a bit of time, but it will still be to a high level of quality. We should see a business case as a flexible framework. But what I found early on in my career and what I see now with others starting out is people always want to know what are the rules, and then they want to apply those rules as a blunt instrument, and they simply aren't. But my subtext here is, and I guess this is my message that I'd like to get across with, unless the people writing a business case and the people who are marking their homework both understand how to use that process, they won't be able to use it flexibly. So you have to know the rules in order to know how to use it in a sensible way. Yeah, nothing should ever be set in tablets of stone. That's one thing I'd like to pass on. I think the second thing is that the quality of a business case product is everything, not the volume. The first business case I wrote of any size is about that wide and filled a lever arch file. And I gather that somebody in the approving body probably used it to prop a door open. Because when I started out, I was a nurse actually who was told, we're going to make you into a project manager. And I learned the hard way. But it is very easy when you're feeling a little uncertain to throw everything at it. We are going to deliver against this policy, that strategy, this principle, and then pack the appendices full of everything you know about those things. But, it can be short and it can be succinct and it can be to the point. And I think if people remember that, they won't sometimes spend ages constructing things that might be slightly over-engineered. My third point would be that you do not ever just sit down and write a business case. I meet people all the time who say, my boss came to me and said, look, take the next 5 days off your usual duties. I want you to wrap a towel around your head, sit down in that office at the end of the corridor and just write the business case for this thing that we want to do. Well, you've sort of lost the plot before you've even started. The business case itself is simply the end point of a set of processes. And whenever anybody comes to me and says, we've got a couple of weeks, we just need to write this business case, but they haven't thought about framing the strategy, identifying the investment objectives, thinking about how they're going to measure it, thinking about how viable it is, and thinking about whether they've got the resources to deliver it in the first place. So, yeah. You don't just sit down and write a business case. It is not a book. It's actually the end point of a load of processes.
Robert, that's fascinating, and many thanks for finding the time to talk to me. It's been a great conversation. I think you have a lot of wisdom to pass on, and I wish you all your success in your management consulting career in passing on what you know to people who need to know the same things.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Lovely to be here.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.